Hello everyone, this is teacher Sumalata here. This session we are going to discuss the first prose from your textbook, The Best Advice I Ever Had, written by Mrs Vijayalakshmi Pandit. Before we start the prose, we shall do a warm-up activity, that is identifying the following great personalities. So children, now on your screen there are some pictures of great personalities. You have to identify who these personalities are. So the first woman is Vijayalakshmi Pandit, the first woman president of the UN General Assembly. Second, Fatima Bibi, the first woman judge of the Supreme Court of India. Third, Kiran Bedi, the first woman IPS officer of India. Fourth, Pratibha Patil, the first woman president of India. Fifth, Indira Gandhi, the first woman prime minister of India. And sixth, Sarojini Naidu, the first woman governor in India. Before we begin, we should know that the prose, we have to know that from where did this prose came into a textbook and what is the reference of the prose. So children, the prose given below is an article written by Mrs Vijayalakshmi Pandit, one of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru's sisters. She wrote it for the Reader's Digest, a monthly magazine, when she was the High Commissioner for India in the United Kingdom. So children, before publishing this article in your textbook, she wrote it for the monthly magazine. The magazine which is going to be published once in a month is called Monthly Magazine, where Vijayalakshmi Pandit wrote this article for the Reader's Digest, a monthly magazine, when she was the High Commissioner for India in the United Kingdom. Now we shall look into a brief introduction about Mrs Vijayalakshmi Pandit. Vijayalakshmi Pandit Swarup Kumari Nehru was born on August 18, 1900 in Allahabad. She was an Indian political leader and diplomat, one of the world's leading women in public life in the 20th century. So we come to know that Mrs Vijayalakshmi Pandit was born on 18th of August 1900 at Allahabad. She was an Indian political leader. Earlier we could see that only men were allowed in politics. But during that time, Mrs Vijayalakshmi Pandit was one of the political leader and a diplomat also. Diplomat means an official who represents his or her country in a foreign country. That means she was an ambassador. After that, she was one of the world's leading women in public life in the 20th century. So, children, now we are in the 21st century. But in the 20th century, women were not given importance for the outdoor work. At that time, women like Mrs Vijayalakshmi Pandit came out of home and started doing the equal work as men. She was the daughter of Motilal Nehru, a wealthy and aristocratic nationalist leader, and sister of Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of independent India. In 1921, after receiving a private education in India and abroad, she married Ranjit Sitaram Pandit. In her family's tradition, she became an active worker in the Indian nationalist movement and was imprisoned 3 times by the British authorities in India. She entered municipal government in Allahabad, the Western India, before entering the Legislative Assembly of the United Provinces, later Uttar Pradesh, and becoming Minister for Local Self-Government and Public Health 1937-39, the first Indian woman to hold a cabinet portfolio. As you all know, children, Mrs Vijayalakshmi Pandit is none other than she is the sister of our first Prime Minister Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru and the daughter of Motilal Nehru, who belonged to a wealthy family. She had completed her private education in India, and for the further education, she went to abroad. After her completion of education, she got married to Ranjit Sitaram Pandit. As you all know, that at the time of 20th century or even earlier, there was a rule of British government in India. If any Indian person or any Indian leader who tried to break the law of the British government or go against British government, the British government used to put them in prison. Similarly, that incident also happened with Mrs Vijayalakshmi Pandit, that she was also imprisoned not once but thrice by the British authorities in India. So Mrs Vijayalakshmi Pandit became the first Indian woman to hold a cabinet portfolio. In 1953, Pandit became the first woman to be elected President of the UN General Assembly. From 1954 to 1961, she was Indian High Commissioner, Ambassador in London and concurrently Ambassador in Dublin. She served as Governor of the state of Maharashtra from 1962 to 1964, and from 1964 to 1968 she was a member of the Indian Lok Sabha, that is Parliament, representing the constituency formerly represented by Jawaharlal Nehru. Children, as she belonged to the political family, she indulged herself into all political activities. She went against the British government and she was a very good diplomat. So, she did all the activities which were done by her family members for the nation. So, this was a brief introduction of Mrs Vijayalakshmi Pandit. Now, let's start the prose. The best advice I ever had, written by Mrs Vijayalakshmi Pandit. The best advice I ever had came from one of the greatest souls of the world has ever known, Mahatma Gandhi, on a sunny afternoon a decade ago. So, in this prose, the best advice what Mrs Vijayalakshmi Pandit got, that came from one of the greatest souls of the world, none other than Mahatma Gandhi ji, on a sunny afternoon a decade ago. Here, decade means 10 years. So, in this paragraph, we come to know that the best advice that she got came from Mahatma Gandhi ji. Now, going to the second paragraph, most people pass through a period of anguish when their belief in humanity is at a low ebb. I was in such a period. My husband had recently died. My deep sorrow over his loss was followed by the humiliating realization that in the eyes of Indian law, I had no individual existence. Along with other Indian women, I had participated for years with men in the national struggle for freedom, working and suffering side by side with them until it had finally been achieved. Yet, in law, we women were still recognized only through a relationship to men. So, in this paragraph, Mrs Vijayalakshmi Pandit was trying to say that most people pass through a period of anguish, means here, anguish means severe mental pain or suffering when their belief in humanity is at a low ebb, means who had low spirit. I was in such a period. Here, I refers to Mrs Vijayalakshmi Pandit. After her husband's death, she had severe suffering with low spirit, sad and alone. That was the period the time came into Mrs Vijayalakshmi Pandit's life, she was feeling totally helpless and alone. She tells that she was in such a period that her husband had recently died. So, children, try to understand that how a woman feels when her husband dies. As her husband died, she was feeling lonely, disappointed, and unhappy. My deep sorrow over his loss was followed by the humiliating realization that in the eyes of Indian law, I had no individual existence. So, after the death of her husband, she started feeling the humiliating realization, means embarrassing and ignored, because she realized that as per the Indian law, a woman is only respected when her husband is alive. If any woman is in a relationship with her husband, or if her husband is alive, then only she is going to be respected by the society, or else the widow women are not going to be respected like other women in the society. So that was one of the cruel situation in which Vijayalakshmi Pandit was stuck. That's why she was feeling helpless and alone. She tells that along with the other Indian women, I had participated for years with men in the national struggle for freedom. Here, she tells that in that situation, when her husband was not with her, the society is not going to respect her or accept her as a common woman. She, without focusing in all these things, took part with other Indian women and men in the national struggle for freedom, working and suffering side by side with them until it had finally been achieved. She was not thinking that what people will say about her. The only aim of her was to do something to her nation. Thus, she was participating in all the activities for making India free from the clutches of the Britishers. But then also, she strongly believed that yet in law, we women were still recognized only through our relationship to men. So she believed that a woman can do anything, can achieve anything, but after her achievements, the society is not going to praise her at all, because she was not in the relationship with men due to her husband's death. Thus, she was feeling helpless and alone. Okay, children, now let's look into the third paragraph. Now, as a widow without a son, I was not entitled to any share of the family property, nor were my two daughters. I resented this galling position. I was bitter towards those members of my family who supported this antiquated law. So, Mrs. Vijayalakshmi Pandit is saying that now, as a widow means a woman whose husband has died. She is called a widow. So, she tells that now, as a widow and without a son, she was not entitled to any share of the family property, not were her two daughters. Thus, she felt angry on this annoying position. She started to think that it is unfair. So, for this reason, she was bitter towards her family members who supported this antiquated law. Antiquated law means an outdated law, because she was a literate and her family members also. So, being educated, her family members were of belief that a widow without son she was not entitled to any share of the family property. Thus, she was bitter towards her family members. A kind of disappointment was there in her heart for her family members. In the fourth paragraph, at this time I went to pay my respects to Gandhiji and say goodbye before leaving for America to take part in a conference. So, Mrs Vijayalakshmi Pandit decided to go America to take part in a conference. So, before leaving for America, she went to meet Gandhiji. After our talk, he asked, "Have you made your peace with your relatives?" I was amazed that he would take sides against me. "I have not quarrelled with anyone," I replied, "but I refuse to have anything to do with those who take advantage of an outworn law to create a difficult and humiliating situation for me." So after her conversation with Gandhiji, Gandhiji questioned her that, "Have you made peace with your relatives?" That means, before leaving for America, have you talked with your family members? So after listening this kind of statement from Gandhiji, Mrs Vijayalakshmi Pandit was shocked. She was totally amazed, thinking that, how can Gandhiji say like this to me? He is saying against me. When Gandhiji asked her this question, she replied that she had not quarrelled with anyone. So quarrelled means an argument or fight with someone. And she also said that, "But I refuse to have anything to do with those who take advantage of an outworn law to create a difficult and humiliating situation for me." She said that the people who are taking advantage of me in this situation where I have 2 daughters and lost my husband, my family members, instead of showing concern to me, they are creating a difficult and humiliating situation for me. Here, humiliating situation means embarrassing situation. So she tells that she doesn't want to talk to such people who are creating such a situation. So in the fifth paragraph, Gandhiji looked out of the window for a moment. Then he turned to me and smiled and said, "You will go and say goodbye because courtesy and decency demand this. In India, we still attach importance to these things." So, in a very simple and calm way, that whatever it may be, whatever bitterness you have kept in your heart for your family members, Gandhiji says like this, whatever it may be and whatever bitterness you have kept in your heart for your family members. Looking out of the window for a moment, then he turned himself towards Vijayalakshmi Pandit and smiled and said, "You will go and say goodbye because courtesy and decency demand this." He says that we people are Indians. We are kind and we believe in relationships very strongly. So you must go to your family members and have to tell them goodbye. Wherever we go, we have to say bye because it is a tradition of India and we still attach, means we still give importance to these things. In the sixth paragraph, "No, I declared, not even to please you will I go to those who wish to harm me." She says that she had already committed herself that she is not going to say anything to her family members and not even to please anyone, not even to please Gandhiji. In the seventh paragraph, "No one can harm you except yourself," he said. still smiling. I see enough bitterness in your heart to cause you injury unless you check it. What a beautiful line Gandhiji tells her, smiling, that no one can harm you except yourself. So Gandhiji says that if you don't meet your family members and if you will not make peace with your family members, then it will remain in your heart, as you already have so much of pain in your heart, and this will cause you more injury. And in the 8th paragraph, I remained silent and he continued, you are going to a new country because you are unhappy and want to escape. Can you escape from yourself? Will you find happiness outside when there is bitterness in your heart? Think it over. Be a little humble. You have lost a loved one. That is sorrow enough. Must you inflict further injury on yourself because you lack courage to cleanse your own heart? Here, as Gandhiji continued to speak, Mrs Vijayalakshmi Pandit remained silent. Gandhiji says her, he said, that I agree that you are going to a new country, to America for a conference. Do you think you are happy going to America? No. You are unhappy and you want to escape from your problems. But tell me, can you escape from yourself? Will you find happiness outside when there is bitterness in your heart? When we are sad from internally and we try to laugh outside, we can produce a fake laughter in our face. But internally, we can't be happy. You may go wherever you want, but when there is bitterness in your heart, you can't be happy. Wherever you go, it will come along with you. So think over it. Be a little humble. Why Gandhiji tells her to be humble? No matter if your family members are not ready to give you a family share, but you be humble, kind, because you have lost a loved one. Here, loved one refers to her husband. That is sorrow enough. As you have lost your husband, that sorrow is enough. Must you inflict further injury on yourself because you lack courage to cleanse your own heart? Here, Gandhiji questions Mrs Vijayalakshmi Pandit. Do you wish to cause still more injury on yourself as because you lack courage to cleanse your own heart? So children, this is the part 1 of the prose, the part 1 explanation of the prose, the best advice I ever had. The second part will continue in the next class, in the next session.